Well, now we can bring in Hendro Munsterman, a Vatican correspondent for daily newspaper Nederlands Dagblad. But you're speaking to us from Brazil, so thanks for joining us. We just heard the
Yes.
blessing there from Pope Leo. Obviously, it is his first, and he has been using this remarkable language, hands full of blood, cities destroyed by war. As someone who's been closely watching him since before his election, is this the Pope you predicted? And how do you read the intensity of his messaging this Easter?
So good morning from Brazil. Yes, Pope Leo is the Pope of peace. I think this is really the core of his whole pontificate. The first words that he pronounced when he was elected on the 8th of May of last year, when he has entered at the same balcony where he gave the blessing of Easter just before. On that balcony, his first words were the words of Jesus Christ, peace be with you. This is a Pope that suffers from the war all over the planet. Of course, we think about what happens in Ukraine, we think about what happens in different parts of the Middle East and in all kind of countries around the world. This Pope puts the peace in the center. What we saw during this Holy Week is very typical for him. It's during the Holy Week there was a red line. There was a red line all about peace, and for him the problem with peace is abuse of power. And this is something this Pope is really keen on. So abuse of power leads to conflicts, and this is something that happens inside the church, and it also happens in the political sphere and outside the church. And this is a Pope that thinks that Jesus, the example of Jesus Christ is an antidote, is a way to fight against these wars that are all rooted in a kind of an abuse of power, and that also he also criticizes his own church. Last Thursday, for example, during the Mass on Holy Thursday, he said that also the church had abused power when they sent missionaries to other continents, and that the church should be shameful about that. So it's something. This abuse of power is a central element in his pontificate, and also an element that helps to understand how peace could be reachable, and that is also why he is able to criticize President Trump like he did last Tuesday.
Now, you've previously said that you were virtually alone in predicting Pope Leo to be the next cardinal. We're almost 1 year on. Does Pope Leo, after his Easter address, is he confirming what you saw in him? And what does that specifically say? What do you think others missed in this prediction?
So it is true that not a lot of journalists saw Pope Leo coming. I think it was he was the only person that he really could succeed to Pope Francis. What was going on in the Catholic Church at this moment, or in last year already? We were in the middle. The Catholic Church was in the middle of a reform process. Pope Francis launched a huge reform process in the Catholic Church. He called this process synodality, which means getting on the way together, walking together on the way as a church. For Pope Francis, this meant that this difference in the Catholic Church between the clergy and the lay people, between the priests and the bishops and the deacons, and the normal men and women inside the church, this difference should be treated in another way. He thinks, Pope Francis thought that lay people should have a more active role inside the church, also when it is about taking decisions and making decisions. There's also this inclusive church of Pope Francis, where also women have more responsibilities, where the LGBT community is more heard, where the poor and the marginalized have a better place. This reform of the Catholic Church wasn't stopped yet. It wasn't achieved yet. So we were in the middle of a reform process. Pope Leo is the one that uses the spaces that Pope Francis created and has to organize it. So Pope Francis was a prophetic pope, I think, that really created new spaces in the Catholic Church, but he didn't organize them. He didn't have time to organize them, and maybe it was not even his biggest talent to organize them. This Pope Leo, is a canon lawyer. He knows how to organize things. He's a mathematician also. Yeah. So in a way, you could say that Pope Francis, who started his professional career as a chemist, who worked in a laboratory, he knew how to put things together and to make it explode. Pope Leo is the Pope that as a mathematician, as a lawyer, knows how to organize the things. So this is the call that this Pope received also from the cardinals. So the big majority of the cardinals accepted and welcomed this reform program of Pope Francis. Now they needed a Pope that is able to make it work and to put it in church law. And I think this is the real call that Pope Leo received during the conclave.
And as you were saying, on those differences compared to Pope Francis, Pope Leo certainly does seem to be more more measured, dare I say, in his approach. And do you see this as a strength or a weakness?
Yeah, so for us as a journalist, in Rome, normally I work in Rome, it's not always easy. So some of my colleagues even talk about a more boring pope. Well, honestly, any pope after Pope Francis would be boring, because Pope Francis had always the capacity to surprise us. But this is a pope that is more moderate in his way of taking things up. He is more calm in his speaking also, but he's doing the job. So the more conservative side of the church, if I can say so, is happy with him because he dresses a bit more traditionally. He is washing the feet of 12 priests instead of washing the feet of women and prisoners and refugees. But when you listen to what this Pope says and to his talks, it is very clear that he's in a more moderate way, but he is very much the same line as the mission Pope Francis took during his 12-year pontificate.
Well, going back to his messaging today, with the US-Israeli war on Iran now in its second month and Ukraine is still grinding on, could the Pope go one step further in his messaging and potentially name names, or does the Vatican's traditional diplomatic caution ultimately limit how far he'll go here?
Yeah, I'm back, I think.
Sorry, well, I'll just repeat my question there. I was just saying we're returning to his strong Easter messaging. We know the US-Israeli war on Iran is now entering its 6th week. Ukraine is still grinding on as well. Is this a pope that's willing to go one step further in his messaging, his already quite direct messaging? Could he name names, or does the Vatican's traditional diplomatic caution here ultimately limit how far he'll go?
Yeah, so the Pope has two roles, and that's a bit the difficulty of every Pope. The Pope is a church leader, and at the same time he is a head of state. So as a head of state, he uses diplomatic language. So he has ministers of foreign affairs, Cardinal Parolin and Archbishop Gallagher, that do the job on the diplomatic in the diplomatic area. So that gives him a language that has to be measured, because the Pope and the Vatican always wants to be able to create dialogue between different parties and not to mention names, as you said. On the other hand, he's a religious leader, he's a church leader. So during his homily, for example, on Palm Sunday, he was very clear, and he used not diplomatic language, but religious language, because he knew very well that the Trump administration also uses religious language to attack Iran. So they use a religious ideology and a religious language to make war. This Pope is able to use the two languages, and also to even to pronounce the name of Donald Trump in his message to journalists last Tuesday. It's a delicate mission that every Pope has. Pope Francis had his own way to do it. Pope Francis was a very political Pope. Pope Leo is more moderate, but he is very much into calling for peace and calling for conversion, because I think for this Pope, this is really what is going on. It is abuse of religion, both from Iran and from the United States. It's abuse of religion, and this calls for another way of being in this world, and this is what Christians would call conversion. So this is a Pope that calls for peace, and this call for peace is a call for conversion, and it's a call ultimately for love. And this is what he said today. Yeah? So the power of Jesus, the power of Christ, he said, that the power of the resurrection is nothing else than the power of love. And this power of love is the only power that is real and that has an authenticity.
Hendro, that's all we have time for. Thank you for speaking to me today. That's Vatican correspondent Hendro Munsterman there. Thank you.